Well, welcome, friends. We have a special message for you today. We have finished up the book of 1 Corinthians last week, and we ended with chapter 16. And the message that we came away with was your memory verse, which is 1 Corinthians 16:14, which is, do everything in love. And I want to continue that theme today. I'm going to look at some very familiar scriptures, but I'm going to ask you to look at them in a new, fresh perspective and ask the Lord to speak new truths into old scriptures. Now, Paul told the Corinthian church when we went through that book that love is more important than anything. It's more important than spiritual gifts. It's more important than ministry skills. It's more important than talents, more important than miracles, more important than social justice, more important than charities, and more important than even martyrdom. In fact, Jesus tells us that the way that people will know that we're truly his disciples is not by our doctrine, not by our words, not by our church affiliation, not by our spiritual gifts, but by our love. And not even just random love. Love for anything that moves. Our love for each other is what will prove to the world that we're his disciples. Now I'm going to look at 4 scriptures and we'll get back to them, but just read with me this point that Jesus and the rest of the New Testament writers are making. John 13:34. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Then two chapters later in John 15:12 and 17, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. This is my command, love each other. 1 Peter says in 3:8-11, all of you should be of one mind, sympathize with each other, love each other as brothers and sisters, be tenderhearted, and keep a humble attitude. And then Galatians. Paul writes to the Galatian church in the last chapter of that book, verse 10, Galatians 6:10, therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone, but especially to those in the family of faith. You see, this, loving one another, doing good to all, but especially those in the family of faith, serving one another with humility, with tenderheartedness, is, in essence, the church being the church. Now, it's an important message. And it's a message of Jesus throughout his ministry and the New Testament writers throughout the whole New Testament. And there's many common phrases that repeat the same thing, like the phrase love each other, like love your brother, like love one another, like love your neighbor as yourself. And we're going to look at all of them. But sometimes these messages get lost in the mix of many other important messages of the Bible. Messages about reaching the lost, preaching the gospel, feeding the poor, helping the needy, loving the sinner, hating the sin, being kind to strangers. These are all important. Also, Jesus tells us to love our enemies, to do good to those who hate you, to bless those who curse you, and bless those who hurt you. Also, very important messages. They're all important, but they should never replace or even take priority over this repeated command of the Lord to love each other as I have loved you. In other words, the title of this message, love other Christians. Love other Christians. Now, I know that sounds a little self-serving, but this is the message of Jesus. This is the message of the New Testament. Let me explain why. When we truly love each other, it creates a magnetic core in the center of our church community, one that attracts people to us and ultimately attracts them to Jesus. There's nothing more attractive to a human being than to be loved. See, we're created in the very image of God, Imago Dei. That means that we're created in his image. And what is his image? What is he like? He is a being that at the very depth of his core, his innate desires are to love and to be loved. We are innately desiring, craving to be loved and also to love, just like God. So when people see in us that divine, true, sacrificial love can be experienced on earth, they're drawn to it magnetically. They want in. I had some MRIs done recently, last week. And if you've ever been to an MRI machine, it's not the most comfortable. Magnetic resonance imaging, they put you in a very tightly enclosed tunnel where huge magnets do scans of your entire body or whatever part of your body that they're checking out. And they use superconductive electromagnets, huge electromagnets that create magnetic waves for the imaging. So it's important that there's no metal on you or in you. Like if you have a metal plate somewhere, they might not even do the imaging. Because any metal that is near you or in you just gets drawn to this electric, powerful magnet. It's amazing. I saw a YouTube video of things gone wrong with MRIs, and somebody just kind of haphazardly had rolled an office chair into the room where the MRI machine was, and they turned it on, and zap! The office chair just got sucked into the machine, and they couldn't pull it out because this thing will attract anything metal. This is how the church is when we love each other. When we lift up Jesus and do what he says, what does he say? Love one another as I have loved you. When we do that, boom, people are attracted. They want in. We lift up Jesus by loving him and loving each other. John 12:32 says, if I am lifted up on the earth, I will draw all peoples to myself. There's a common illustration of a church community drawn in concentric circles. So you have the community really is the outer part, but the circles look like a bullseye with the outer ring being the crowd, and then more of a central ring, not the center, but the central ring being the congregation. And then at the very middle, the bullseye is the core. So the community hopefully becomes the crowd. That's people that come from time to time. And then eventually they become the congregation that really is making up the church body. And then moving again towards the center, they become the core, those who take on leadership, those who serve and give regularly. Now, when a church has a magnetic core, everything's enhanced. So you can imagine that same illustration with community on the outside. That's anybody that lives in your area, not just your town, but driving distance. Hopefully, they become coming more towards the center, and they become part of the crowd, and eventually they become part of the congregation, and then the magnetic core. But when that magnetic core is supercharged, like that superconductive electromagnet that I just talked about with the MRIs, people come in, they just want, and that's really how churches grow. The early church knew this, and that's what they were experiencing in Acts chapter 2. When the church really started to form and to meet, well, here's what was happening. Acts 2:44 through 47 says, all the believers were together and had everything in common, meaning they shared. Then they sold property and possessions and gave to everyone who had need. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. They had a magnetic love. And what happened? The Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. That's what it means to have a magnetic core of love at the center of the church. Now, Paul speaks emphatically about this in the verse that we read in the last chapter of Galatians. It's Galatians. And we'll read 9 and 10. It says this in chapter 6, verse 9 and 10. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we don't give up. Therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all people, but especially to those who belong to the family of faith. Now, Paul is telling us, he's right here, we are to do good things to as many people as possible, but especially, first and foremost, to do good to and for other Christians. Remember, love other Christians. You see, sometimes it's easier to care for a stranger or to show love to an outsider than it is to our own brother or sister in the Lord. Now, listen, our priority should never be to pander to the world and try to prove that we love them, by doing and extending ourselves in different ways at the expense of loving people within the church. Because the greatest commandment is this. It's written in Matthew, but we're going to read it from Luke. Luke 10:27. You must love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, some people interpret this as neighbor could be just anyone, anywhere. But in the context, the Hebrew understanding of neighbor in the first century comes from the Greek word plesion, and it means those near to you. It's simple, neighbor, those near to you. Whether they're from, your own tribe, your own community, your own family, your neighbor is those near to you. It's not the same word as stranger. It's not the same word as foreigner. Those are different. Now listen, like Paul just said, we're to love all people. But the greatest commandment tells us primarily to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. And see, this is why Jesus gave that new commandment. Yeah, new commandment. That was, probably not very popular. There was already 613 commandments. He gave them another one. Now there's 614. New commandment, John 13, 34 and 35. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. What is it? Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Verse 35, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. We are supposed to love each other, developing cultivating a community of love one with another. That's when we magnetize it. That's when outsiders want in. But if we don't love each other, it's really almost repulsive to outsiders. Let me explain something. I'll give you a story. I went to a Chinese restaurant, takeout, later in the day one time, a while back. And it was probably about 15 minutes before closing. So it was family owned. So you saw the dad and the mom, a son and then a younger daughter. And the dad was cooking the food. The mom was sort of packing things up, cleaning things up for the day. The son was in the back, but he was doing his homework. And I think the daughter was playing. The dad was not in a good mood. It was probably a tough day. Listen, I've been in business myself. I know you have those tough days and everyone's a little snappy at each other. And that was definitely the case with this family. Snapping at the mom, snapping at the kid. The kid said something with the homework. He kind of snapped rudely at him. He was trying to cook. The mom was saying something a little bit, she sensed the tension. I was like, oh boy. And then he walks up to me at the counter. He says, hello, good evening. How can I help you? Big smile on his face. I gave him my order. He says, I'd be delighted. Thank you. And then, big smile, and then he went back and started snapping away. Now, listen, I'm not blaming the guy, probably had a bad day. But I realized in that moment, I was not the one he needed to be kind to. I was not the one he needed to show love to. I was just a customer. They were his family. That was his wife. Those were his children. The love needed to be cultivated in that family. I'm sure he loved his family. He was just having a bad day. But see, sometimes it's easier to be friendly to some outsider, to some church visitor, to some guests, even some worldly person on the street than our own brothers and sisters in the Lord, our own family in the Lord. But our goal is not to please worldly people, not to convince them that we are, all one and we like the same things they like, not to prove desperately that we just want to be their friend. That's not our goal. Our goal is to love God and love each other and invite them into that. Invite them into this environment of real love that they can't experience anywhere else. Romans 12, 9 and 10 says this, don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good, but love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Whew, that is so powerful. It makes a powerful impression to unbelievers. You see, when we love and honor each other with genuine affection, it sends a message to the world that genuine love actually does exist. And they're impressed by it and they are drawn to it. It's more effective for church growth than church marketing campaigns. Thousands of mailings, social media advertisement, billboards, magazine ads. Trust me, I tried them all. Even more impressive than impressive buildings or compelling speakers or popular worship bands or celebrities. It's more effective to have love for one another. Jesus said, if I am lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all people to myself. And we do that by loving him and loving each other. I remember years ago, we were doing an outreach. Our church was doing an outreach on a busy street. And they had set up a stage. We had a worship band. We played worship, and the band sounded good. And we preached, and big crowd. Everyone loved it. Mostly people from our church. Brought them, and they brought their friends. Big crowd, and everyone seemed to really enjoy it. It was a good time. And there was a shop owner. I think he might even owned a tobacco store, standing along the side, smoking a pipe and just observing. You could tell he wasn't one of us. He just was a shop owner, a merchant, observing this whole crowd. And so one of our people went up and said, hey, so did you like the music? Did you find the message interesting? And he's smoking his pipe and he said, yeah, somewhat. But I'll tell you what really impressed me. You people really seem to love each other. I saw people hugging each other and happy and greeting and you guys really seem to love each other. That's very impressive. More impressive than my great message. More impressive than our tremendously talented worship team. That was nothing compared to what he saw in the people loving each other. You see, when we don't love each other, we show the world that we're just no different than they are. And that includes when we gossip about each other, when we criticize each other, when we neglect to help our brothers and sisters who are in need, when we act more friendly or give more grace to those outside the church, those with the secular worldview that we're trying to coax in, when we show them more grace and more love than our fellow congregants. Nothing pleases the heart of the Father, of any father, more than seeing his children truly loving and caring for one another. And probably nothing grieves him more than when we don't. In fact, that, I believe, is the context of this very popular parable, the Good Samaritan. I believe that's what it's all about. So I want to read the parable of the Good Samaritan from Luke 10, and I want you to just give it a fresh look. Starts with the greatest commandment. Luke 10, 25, 37. One day an expert of religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question: Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus replied, what does the law of Moses say? How do you read it? Well, the man answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right, Jesus told him, do this and live. The man wanted to justify his action, so he asked Jesus, well then, who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied with a story. Here it is. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho. He was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes. They beat him up. They left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant, a Levite, walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by the other side. And then, verse 33, a Samaritan came. And when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. And then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If the bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you next time I'm here. Verse 36. Now which of these would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. And the man replied, the one who showed him mercy. And then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. Common parable, you've heard it many times. But I want to tell you, this parable is not just a lesson in random acts of kindness, as most people interpret it. You see, the Samaritan man definitely showed tremendous mercy and compassion on a Jewish man who was beaten and robbed. So, cross-culturally, he showed love, showed compassion. But Jesus sums up the parable by saying to the expert of the religious law who asked, now go and do the same. In other words, the Samaritan helped the Jewish man in ways that the Jewish priest and the Jewish temple assistant, the Levite, should have done in the first place. That was the message. This Samaritan showed you what the Jewish person should have done to the Jewish man, or the temple priest or the Levite should have done to one of their own who was in need. Let me give you a personal example. I have 2 daughters and my wife, and we live in a small subdivision. And just suppose one of my daughters was out riding her bike and maybe she falls and she breaks her leg and she can't make it home. But the other daughter is out for a walk and sees her lying on the side of the road and just goes across the street and walks away and passes her by. And then my wife is also out for a walk and she sees my daughter lying on the road, broken leg, but she also passes by and just goes on her way. And then some neighbor from, maybe not even a neighbor, a person from another subdivision happens to be in our neighborhood, and they see her, and they were moved with compassion, and they take her to the hospital, and they wait for her to be cared for, they pay her medical bills, and they drive her home. Now, if I come home and I hear that story, I hear what happened, what transpired, how do you think I'd react? What do you think I would be upset about? Of course, I'd be upset about the broken leg, but as long as it's healed and being cared for. But I'd be really upset that the other daughter and my wife just walked by their own daughter, sister, lying in the road, needing help. That would perplex me. I would have told them that stranger, the other subdivision, did what they should have done. And I would lecture them on the importance of loving each other, really loving one another. And Jesus knew that this priest who asked the question and these experts of religious law were notorious for saying that they loved God, but they did not show love to others. They didn't show love to one another, and definitely not strangers. But that was what he said. Love God, love one another. John tells it to us this way, 1 John 4:20. Whoever claims to love God and hates his brother, or does not love his brother or sister, is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God who they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother, their sister. Love one another. How do we love one another? Just remember Paul's litany of love. You can go back to 1 Corinthians 13 and find it. Love is patient, love is kind, it's not envious, it's not rude, and it goes on and on and on. But it starts with having love and sympathy and empathy and compassion for each other with a humble heart. And that's why 1 Peter 3:8 says this: finally, all of you should be of one mind. Sympathize with one another. Love each other as brothers and sisters. Be tenderhearted to keep a humble attitude. Now, make no mistake, I am not saying that we should only love those in the church. We should definitely love everyone. Love the stranger, love the foreigner, love everyone. In fact, we should love them as a neighbor and be willing to show God's kindness and unconditional love to every unbeliever. But we should never replace that for loving each other. In fact, Leviticus 19:33 and 34 tells us that. This is right from the Torah. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you are foreigners in Egypt, and I am the Lord your God. Loving everyone. But remember, prioritizing those who are near. Paul, Galatians 6:10, especially those in the household of faith. You know, sometimes when it's cold, and when we were working in New York, I was working there, and then we were working there doing music, Allie and I, we always would, around Christmas time, buy a little stack of Dunkin' Donuts gift cards, just a $5 gift cards, because we'd get a lot of panhandlers that would knock on the windows as we were waiting at a light. And it was always nice to be able to offer them this gift card, you know, to the homeless strangers and the panhandlers and people out there in the cold, because it makes you feel good. It really does. It makes you feel like a hero. You can sit, you picture them in your mind, taking the gift card and, you know, going somewhere, having a cup of hot coffee, or, you know, Dunkin' Donuts, some Dunkin' Donuts, a French curler, or Bavarian cream, or chocolate frosted, or one of those pre-made egg roll-ups, or one of the chocolate ones with the custard, the Boston cream. That's a good one. And it makes you feel really good thinking about them just enjoying that. You pat yourself on the back. But then, why doesn't it feel good to give it to someone you know, or give it to a friend or a church or something like that? You know, it's like, you could buy your own donut. These are for people that, you know, I want to be the hero to. Why doesn't it feel good to help people that are just around you? It should. It's wrong if it doesn't. We should do good to all people, but especially those in the family of believers, cultivating a magnetic core of love. John told us this and in his gospel. Then he writes it again later when he writes his letters. And I'm going to close with these verses. 1 John 3:11 and then 16 through 18. This is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. This is how we know what love is. Jesus laid his life down for us, and we ought to lay our lives down for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions or sees a brother and sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. You know, Jesus did both. He did both. Love, speech, action, and truth. He loved us with everything that he had within us. That's why it's important to remember that. That's why communion is important. When we do this in remembrance of him, it's not just remembering that he lived, but also remembering his death. It says every time you do this, you remember my death and resurrection. So as we prepare our hearts for communion, let's meditate on the following verses, knowing that the whole reason we celebrate communion is that Jesus demonstrated his incomparable, unconditional love for us by suffering torture, by being nailed to the cross, and by dying for us. And greater love is no one than someone that would do that. John 15, 9 through 13. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. Let's prepare our hearts for communion.